Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
So to everyone who's watching this, who's familiar with me on the internet, this is
Mhm.
one of my good friends. His name is Wael, and he is a
Yep.
Bahraini.
Mm-hmm.
Could you flash the flag,
Just to
the prop we have
prove
ready?
my credentials. Yeah.
So he is my token Arab friend. As a Persian nationalist, I have to. No, I'm joking. But so me and him go way back. I guess I'll introduce how we know each other. I added this guy on Facebook a long time ago. I won't mention him. He's not super relevant to the story. And through this guy that I met through Reddit, actually. So I met this guy through the Iranian subreddit, and then I found him on Facebook randomly. He was anonymous on Reddit, but I knew he was the guy from Reddit via the descriptions of himself on Facebook. So I added him. I say, hey, we interact on Reddit. And he wasn't so comfortable with me knowing his ulterior ego on Reddit, but it was fine. So we were talking, and then I noticed that our friend Wael here was commenting on some of his posts. And at the time, this must have been like 3 years ago, I think, going this far back. I was so fascinated because that was right when I was getting interested in Arab culture. And I see this guy with a qitra and naqa, like Arab, Khaliji dress as he's wearing now. But he's commenting in Persian and Arabic and Esperanto and English. I'm like, who is this guy? How does he know all this stuff? So I just like randomly added him. And I think I might have just sent him some memes or some dumb stuff. And, here we are 3 years later, still talking on the internet. And we've been talking a long time about kind of having a forum where we do what we discuss, but in a way that other people can see, because we think a lot of the stuff that we discuss is stuff that people in our position, modern Muslims, modern MENA, Middle Eastern, North Africa people think about. So we thought it'd be an interesting platform to have some of our conversations out. So I thought that because I figure most people watching me probably are already familiar with me, that we would just spend this first session talking about my friend and who he is before we go forward about other things, so that you guys can, inshallah, be more familiarized. So I guess I'll pass it on to you. You can give a basic introduction of yourself, and then I'll just start asking you about your life.
Okay, cool. Well, first of all, I'm really happy to be here with you, Mahdi. I mean, this is the first time we've actually spoken like this.
Right, yeah.
On this kind of platform. I mean, we've had, back and forth on WhatsApp for close to 3 years now. And it's interesting, talking to you as a person of American and Iranian background. And I think that a lot of what we say is interesting in that it hasn't really been said before. I mean, maybe it's said in private sort of settings, but nobody talks about it. Like, we need to talk about this perspective and, how everybody nowadays has a platform on social media. And I hope people will find this interesting, especially people of similar background to us. So, I'll give an introduction of myself. And if you have, questions, you can go ahead and ask. So my name is Wael. I come from Bahrain. It's my Smile Island, we're neighbors to Dubai. Everybody knows Dubai. Wonderful, emirate, neighbor to Saudi Arabia, Kuwait. So we're within that sort of cultural, background, Arabic speakers, Muslims. And I've lived here almost all of my adult life. I work here, I have a family, but I lived in the US when I was younger as a child. So that was back in the 80s. And, I'm showing my age now, but that's okay.
So I want you to, that's what I wanted to begin talking about actually, is I want you to begin by kind of telling me about life in American 80s. How did you come to be in America? Where were you? Just basic things like that. And inshallah, maybe we'll go into some more detail.
Cool. So, you see, in the 80s, the government here, they started giving scholarships. And there was a drive to get, people to learn and study. And my dad was one of those people who got scholarships. So he got a scholarship to America. He went to Washington at the beginning, and we weren't with him. So I was already born back then. And so he went to check it out. He liked America very much. My dad has and still has, had and still has an adventurous bent. So he came back to Bahrain, and he got me and my mother, and we went to, first of all, we went to Tucson, Arizona. That was in the early 80s. So he was accepted in the University of Arizona to do his master's degree. And he was planning to stay there, for the duration of his master's degree. It turns out we stayed for almost 10 years. So we lived in several different places, Arizona, California, Pennsylvania, Philadelphia and Pennsylvania. And then eventually we left shortly after the first Gulf War. So shortly after 1990, I think end of 1990, came back to Bahrain.
So you spent about a decade in America.
Yeah, exactly. So, I was quite young back then, because when we went to America, I was about almost 1 year old. So, but, formatively, I became sort of shaped by my time in the US.
Shaped by growing up there. So I've
Yes.
read that people's personality and a lot of aspects about them that are more or less static are formed in those developmental years. And I think a lot of what I see in you comes from that. Because although you might not see that in the exterior, you know, from the way you look or where you live or things like that, but I mean, and I feel like maybe many Muslims nowadays, just because of the general globalization, are very American or have taken on a lot of American elements on the inside. But you actually grew up in the belly of the beast, as the Iranians would say.
So to
So
speak.
how was that in the 80s growing up as an Arab? Because I mean, nowadays in America, for various reasons, sadly, because of 9/11 and the wars and mass immigration now in Syria and all that, everyone in the world knows, for better or for worse, you know, sadly, what an Arab is, or generally as an idea. And even in the most remote places in the world, really everyone knows now. But I think back then it was, I mean, before the wars, before mass migration, wasn't really as well known. So how was that being Arab in, you said Tucson?
Well, you know, back then, being Arab, being Muslim, being brown wasn't really a thing. I mean, it's not, and people talk about representation, right, for minorities. There was no representation. Like, you could never see like a brown person, or, you know, very rarely see a brown person or a Muslim person in a positive light on TV. So when we were there in the US, it was really different, you know, or strange in a sense, being a brown person, being Muslim, being Arab. And a lot of people, they just didn't know the difference. I mean, they heard about all the wars, you know, the Lebanon, Iran, Iraq, but they had no idea, you know, what it meant. I mean, they couldn't tell the distinction. And I mean, you found this in sort of practical ways. Like, it was very difficult to get halal meat. And I'm
Wow.
told, and I haven't been to the US for a long time, but I'm told that it's easier now to get halal
Oh,
meat.
it's everywhere. Even in remote places, you can find it in grocery stores.
Okay, so that, yeah, so you know, there was a stage where my dad was slaughtering,
Wow.
goats and other, you know, cattle to
I've
provide
heard
halal
this
meat. Mm.
from people who came actually in that era in the 70s and 80s, that random Muslims would take it upon themselves to purchase animals and slaughter them, sometimes in a clandestine manner, because some ordinances prohibit slaughtering of animals by
I was just going
individuals.
to say that. I mean, I
Yeah.
wonder if you're able to do this today. Like, you know, when back in
Yeah.
the 80s, I would, you know, we would load the truck, you know, like
Mhm.
like load up the truck, you know, boy, and we would go to the, yeah. You know, we would have all our stuff like that. We had an axe, you know,
Mhm.
just a real axe just to cut up the, yeah, it's really like Dexter-like
Wow,
stuff.
that's
Yeah,
incredible.
and knives and stuff. And we used to go to the farm, white farm, obviously, and we would buy, you know, the cattle on site and slaughter them there. And
Wow,
I saw this sort of step by step. You know, my dad was a self-taught man, and he
incredible.
used to slaughter the animals and then skin them and all that. And then we put them up, put them in bags, take them back to, you know, Tucson, to where we were living, and then sell them to the Muslims there, regardless of you know, sectarian belonging. By the way, like, everybody wanted the halal meat, that sweet halal meat, you know. So
It's incredible. You know, it's
yeah.
amazing because a lot of times people in my generation think we're in a vacuum, and we're complaining about the way things are for us in a lot of ways. But we have huge privileges. You can go to a Chinese restaurant in the city I studied university in and ask for their halal options.
Hmm.
I don't think anyone even knew what halal was back then.
No, nobody had any idea. Actually, what made it even stranger was that, you know, we're from Bahrain. Nobody knows where Bahrain is. Like, to this day, yeah. I mean, when you tell someone, I mean, you say Dubai, then people get it. They, oh,
Mhm.
like Dubai, you know, you go to Turkey
Yeah.
and you say Bahrain, they think you're in Mecca or Medina or something. They don't.
Really?
Yeah, they don't.
Even in
You know,
Turkey with
yeah,
that
even in Turkey.
proximity?
Yeah. I mean, it's like, because the Turks have this, you know, Ottoman past. It's enough to say you're Muslim, basically. Usually, like Musulman. But if then if you say Bahrain, they're like, you know, well, we don't know Bahrain. They say Dubai. Oh, Dubai, yeah, Dubai.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Even that
çok
close.
yakıştı.
Amazing.
Yeah. So back then, like, I used to say I was from Bahrain. People thought I was from the Bahamas. Yeah, I mean, I fit the profile, but come on, you know, like,
Similar
yeah,
type of climate, I guess.
they were sort of going on the skin thing, probably,
Yeah,
but you
probably.
know,
Yeah.
yeah.
Wow. That's incredible. So, I mean, we're such a stark difference. Back then, there was no halal meat. And now, like I said, you go to a Chinese, you go to the buffet and they have halal options. So, you guys were really freestyling it back then. There weren't as many infrastructural things available for Muslims. There wasn't, I mean, no one even probably knew. I mean, I guess they must have known what a Muslim was at least. But
No. Like I said, it wasn't a
really?
thing. Yeah, it wasn't a thing. Like, today, you got Hassan Minhaj, for example, on
Right.
Netflix. You know, speaking for brown people and, you know,
Yeah.
advocating the use of the luta. You know, the shatfa. We didn't have that back then, man. It's
You
like,
guys didn't?
yeah,
No.
yeah, and you know, people didn't talk about this. Like, what was multiculturalism? Nobody had any idea. You know, you
That's
were expected
incredible.
to assimilate. And that's how you survive basically. But it wasn't really that bad. We talked about this before. Like a lot of people have a negative view of the West of America.
Yeah.
I had a good experience there. I mean, I'm not
Wow.
saying it was like ideal,
Mm-hmm.
but you could feel the freedom, and I think I was influenced by this to this day. It's both the physical freedom. Like I remember one night we were in Tucson, Arizona, and my cousin was visiting us, and my dad said, just on a lark, he said, why don't we go to Disneyland? So we just
Mm-hmm.
packed up all stuff and went to Disneyland. It was like
Amazing.
complete freedom. And I guess when you live in the East, maybe it's a bit different. I mean, yeah, you
Right.
have your pros and cons, obviously, but yeah, I mean, America I still think it's great, despite its many failings, and
Right.
it's a
Yeah.
great place to go up and,
It's becoming very unfashionable to say something
mm.
like that. And
Exactly. I know.
sometimes
Yeah.
I think people who listen to me get the sense that I don't think that because I complain
Mm,
so much. But deep
mm,
down, I more or less agree with you that there's a lot of things that are mumayyaz, that are khas to this place, special,
exactly.
that
Yeah.
you can't really find. And a lot of times I look at myself, I feel like the type of the weird eccentric person that I am with all my
Mm,
faults. Some of the things that I like about myself are the product of being in this type of society with all of its flaws and
mm,
positives taken together. So there's a lot of it. So you were there back then. No one knows
mm.
what Arabs are. I mean,
No, no.
not that they know now, but no one knows where Bahrain is. And you were growing up as a Muslim. Did people know what Islam was? Had they at least heard of
No,
it?
no. They had no idea.
They didn't
And
even
there were,
hear of it.
no, mostly no. And when they did hear about it, it
Wow.
was mostly negative. I mean, you have to remember, back in the 80s, this was on the heel of Lebanon,
Lebanon
the,
Civil
the,
War. Yeah.
the explosion that, killed all the
The
American
Marines.
soldiers.
Yeah.
And then you had the 7-year-long Iran-Iraq war, which didn't, do us any favors, sort of from a reputation point of view, because people can't tell the difference.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, I mean, as Arabs and Iranians, we like to think, we like to talk about Harpan, about how different we are. But
They
to
don't
white
know.
people, we're the same. They can't tell the difference.
Yeah.
And I remember, we had Iraqi colleagues, we had Iranian colleagues, and there was this sort of constant, Cold War between them. And this is the thing about America is that you got these two enemies living side by side,
It's very odd. Yeah.
and yeah, it's very odd. And the white people, they have no idea. It's like that we have
Yeah.
their own sort of little cosmos,
I remember one time
microcosm.
I was in, I think it was in a Husseiniya or something, and I knew two people from different sides from in the same. It was like a mixed Iranian Iraqi Husseiniya, and the sheikh spoke both because he was Iraqi, but he studied in Qom. So his khutbah was really like a linguistic dream, to study it. He would almost every other sentence switch between the two languages to accommodate either group, and we like developed our own pidgin of communication. It was incredible. But I remember knowing specifically that there were people present in the majalis from both sides of the Iran-Iraq war.
Mm,
And I feel like the whole enemies living side by side thing that the whites, I feel like they just couldn't understand that whites. I mean, maybe you can make like a World War II reference, but like that's lost upon them at this point. But like,
mm,
it's very interesting things you see in diaspora. I see this in London a lot. I monitor their diaspora all the time. You see
mm.
conflicting sides, India, Pakistan, whatever country come together in those diaspora, and they're kind of butting heads while living in the poor whites. They're lost. Why do they hate each other? They're the same, aren't they? They look
Mm.
the same.
Actually, we're more the same than we are different. I mean,
Bro.
not just but sort of covering the whole Middle East and all the way to the subcontinent.
Yeah, and I think me and you
Yeah.
talking, we kind of realize that more the more we talk to each other about our respective cultures. And I definitely realized that a lot when I lived in Jordan. I'd
Mm,
already had a sense of that because I knew so many Arabs, but I figured, diaspora, we're all Americans. I thought that maybe our similarities were also our Americanness binding us together. But when I went to Jordan, interacting with Saudis, Iraqis, Turks, whatever, I realized, wow, we are really more
mhm.
similar than we are different
Yeah,
in a
we
lot of
are.
ways.
I mean, I like to think of this as a meta culture.
I would
Because
agree with that
yeah, yeah.
classification. So many things I realized when I was learning Arabic. So many things when I was learning in the Muslim program in Qasid, they would just say, and everyone would get it. So
Mm,
when we were learning Ibarat, they would say Taj Rasi, the crown of my head.
mm.
I say, oh, Taj
Exactly. Yeah.
Salam. And the Turkish guy himself said, oh, whatever that means in Turkish. But
Mm,
when we were doing that in the university with the Westerners, because mostly Westerners were studying at Jordan
mm,
University, they weren't getting it. What do you mean you're the crown of my head? Does that mean you're like better or worse than me? Oh,
mm.
and when they say Nur Aini in class, I said, oh, Nur
Yeah.
Chish. But then the
Mm,
white person said, well, isn't like there always just an equal amount of light like entering your eye? How does that? I don't
mm.
understand. Or when you want to say like I'm the
Mm.
dirt under your feet or something, like
Yeah, exactly. Or
I
when you
got
say
that.
hawk to Sarat or something like
Yeah, like
that.
I got all these
Yeah,
things, you know
yeah,
what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah.
But then So we are really from this bigger culture divided by things like,
Mhm,
you know, whether you have one piece of cloth or a wrap of cloth, or whether,
mhm, mhm.
you know, you can say ein or you can't. Whether these small differences,
And
it's
you
not
know,
that big.
like, this is not the product of you know, like several decades. This is a millennia long process, and it's been going on with before Islam, and Islam consolidated
Definitely.
how similar we are. Like, you know, the Arabs and the Persians, they had all sorts of interactions before Islam. You know, it was pretty dramatic actually,
Right.
and then it culminated, you know, in the Islamic period. And you know what's interesting, that I even find that people from the subcontinent, even Hindus, are similar, you know, to us in certain sensitivities, sensibilities. Like, it's not only the
Definitely.
Muslims from India and Pakistan; it's also Hindus. You know,
Yeah,
they tend to
definitely.
have a similar, you know, mentality.
Yeah, I learned this.
And
Go ahead.
now I was just going to say that it's not only a linguistic thing. I mean, what you said, like, is correct, but it's also, you know, a lot of sensibilities. Like, when you talk to another, you know, person from the Middle East, or India, or Iran,
Mm.
like, there are certain implicit assumptions that you just share without having to explain. I'll give you
Wow.
an example. For example, I go to Turkey. Like, Turkey is supposed to be a secular country, right?
Hmm.
But obviously, you know, they're steeped in Islam, and they used to be a caliphate.
Right. Yeah.
So if you go there with the family and you have a hijabi wife, they just get it immediately. You know, they sense this thing. It's not weird to them, even though they might not be hijabis, but they do understand where you're coming from, and they
Hmm.
have this appreciation for this kind of, you know, family sensibility. And you find it even in places that are not ostensibly Muslim, like Singapore, for example. Now,
Right.
Singapore has a Chinese majority, but historically it's a Malay, you know, area, and they have a lot of Malays too. So it's the same thing. But whereas when you go to, I don't know, like Dublin, Ireland, because nobody gets, you know,
They
this,
don't get
this
it.
sort of
Yeah.
family sensibility. You know, so it's very interesting how similar we are. And even like in restaurants, you know, in Istanbul, if you go in with a family, they tend to treat you in a different way.
Yeah.
Like,
They
you know,
treat you
you're a
differently.
family man, and they don't talk to your wife; they talk to you. You know, they have these sort of Islamic sensibilities. Obviously, make
Definitely.
things easier if you understand
Yeah.
what's going on.
I noticed that a lot. I'd interact with the Hindus a lot, and the American Hindus. But I remember when I studied economics, I befriended a guy who was an Indian Hindu straight from India, and he actually is in Bahrain, probably very close to
Hmm.
you right now. I'll shout
Yeah,
him
very
out, Ram
interesting.
Gopal.
But
His
under
his
lockdown, so you know he shouldn't come out right now.
so
But
I remember when I befriended him, I realized, wow, like all of our sensibilities are the same. When we
mm,
would be walking around campus and he'd laugh at something someone was doing and I'd laugh, we would both get it.
mm,
You know,
mm,
I realized like, wow, even I erroneously thought it was just the religious stuff. That was why, you know, we had similarities with people, but really we
mm,
are kind of from this giant culture. And it
mm,
even, like you said, it goes back to before Islam. It's
mm,
really incredible. And you can even sense it in the poetry. When I read poems, when
mm,
they want to talk about something very distant, they talk about like China, because China to us, that was like the border of when our
mm,
civilization
mhm,
ended.
mhm,
So they consider from like Bengal like to be the farthest end of our people, and
mhm,
then all the way to Rum. So
mm.
anyone kind of in between is in this large. Obviously, there's a gradient. You know, it's not the same.
Mhm.
It's very different all around.
Obviously, yeah.
Even from, you know, Gulf country to Gulf country, from
Mm.
kingdom to emirate, you can see a difference. But
Exactly. Yeah.
overall, we have the same sensibilities and
Yeah.
ideas, and we like
Yeah.
and dislike the same thing.
Mhm.
But anyway,
And it goes all the way even to sort of, you know, certain gestures. Like, I remember while I was in Iran once.
yeah,
You know, this is an Iranian anecdote. I have a lot of Iranian anecdotes, by the way. So maybe we'll get to those later. So we were at a conference. You know, we were
yeah.
officially invited, and we were representing Bahrain. And I had these two Turks, you know, who were there, and we met them, and obviously, you know, the Turks, although they told me they're of Georgian origin. Originally, they're from Georgia,
Wow.
like Gurjistan, you know, but they're Turks. And we got a taxi, and I wanted to pay, and then he sort of like hit me on the hand like this, and he said,
Right.
"Astaghfirullah,
Same
astaghfirullah," you know.
thing. Same thing.
Exactly. I mean, this is a secular guy, you know. He's probably not religious, you know. He probably like drinks and stuff like that. But at the end, he is a Muslim. He's
And
going to
you
be able
got it.
to,
You understood
yeah.
what that meant.
Exactly, yeah, and you know, it sort of showed me how similar we are. So yeah, that's really interesting.
That's really incredible. We all really do have the same sensibilities. And
Mm,
I remember this reminded me of a debate about, is there a quote unquote Muslim culture? Because this became a thing on an Instagram post I saw where
mm,
some guy who had specific Islamic leanings, we won't get too into it,
mm,
he posted, you know, Islam and culture are like oil and water. They shouldn't mix. You know, you should just have Islam. And a lot of, I notice converts to Islam tend to follow this thing where they just want a package of a religion, but they don't want any Desi or Iranian or Arab culture attached to it. But there was a comment war ensuing, and I found it really interesting, debating, is there a Muslim culture? And I remember I meet a lot of people who they say I'm not Muslim, but I'm culturally Muslim. Or I don't believe, but I'm culturally still Muslim completely. Like I do everything that Muslims do. I just don't believe it inside. Not necessarily prayer, but like as far as the way you lead your life, so to speak. And I hear this a lot, and I notice that people identify more and more in my generation with being culturally Muslim, but not by belief. And it makes me think, what is cultural Islam? It certainly exists because there's meme pages like Muslim Memes UK, and everyone who's Muslim laughs at the meme regardless of the origin. We have certain elements that are universal to us, and I feel like it creates a lot of understanding between us, regardless of how different we kind of are.
Definitely. I think this Islamic identity, again, it precedes, and we've talked about this a lot, me and you, it precedes any sort of nationalistic, identity or belonging. It's more organic, so to speak. So, before the Soviet Union, or before Russia, in Central Asia, for example, being simply Muslim was a thing. Under Ottoman, the Ottoman Empire, being just a Muslim was a thing. And when Western people said Turk, they meant Muslim, basically.
Wow.
I was reading about Kazan, the capital of Tatarstan, which is now a republic in Russia. And they used to call the Tatars just Muslims, Musliman.
Really?
Yeah. So there were points in Islamic, history where whole peoples were identified simply as Muslims, regardless of whether they were Turkic, Islamic, or Arab. And as far as Arabs are concerned, I mean, let me just put this out there, and this is not hyperbole. I think this is a fact. It's really almost meaningless to be an Arab without being a Muslim, because Islam put the Arabs out there. They created the Arabs, basically.
Right.
I mean, there were Arabs before. I mean, we had the peninsula all to ourselves. We were sort of doing sort of weird, heathen crap there, but But then the Prophet Muhammad came and he united us. He united, the Arab Peninsula, and he forged the Arabs into a single nation, which then burst onto the world stage, and that is why it's really difficult. So I don't think there's a separate Islamic culture, or a separate Islamic identity. It has to be. I mean, it's complicated. I mean, obviously, you can't be Muslim without being Iranian. I can't be Muslim without being Arab.
I agree.
And, but on the other hand, it's just interesting to see how these parts come together. And I think a lot of it is also still information, because a lot of these, Western Muslims, obviously they've been influenced by Western, models. I'm thinking specifically about like cultural Jews. Now, don't tell me that had no effect on, the concept of the cultural Muslim, for example.
No, it did. I think that's just a copy paste of that. The idea of being culturally Muslim is kind of a copy. But one thing I've noticed is that Jews, even if they're completely atheists or barely believing, they have a greater sensibility of retaining their Jewishness versus people who strictly identify as culturally Muslim. They tend to becomes like less and less. Well, one thing I've noticed that you mentioned though is I have noticed this, and I think it's a kind of controversial to say that being Muslim and being Arab go hand in hand in a way, and that non-Muslim Arab groups are kind of on the periphery of Arabness in a way, where they're not super mainstream. I don't know if I'm putting this the right way. I don't want to offend anyone's sensibilities, but I just think that Arab Christians are like their own thing and they're Arab. Whereas when I think of someone like your group or people in the peninsula, I think you guys are Muslim and Arab at the same time, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It does make sense. I mean, I don't think it's an option. Like I remember when I was coming up, as a teenager, people were like, "Oh, your Islamic identity, precedes your Arab identity." But I don't think it has to be like that. Why does it have to be a competition? It goes hand in hand, and it just all meshes together. The culture. I mean, Islam. Muslims know that Islam was influenced by Arab culture, by pre-Islamic Arab culture, and there's of course I'm not a faqih, I'm not an Islamic scholar, and I don't want to be sort of taken as such, but there is a well-known principle in fiqh that if something no, let me restate that. What is original in things is that they are halal.
They must be proven haram.
Exactly. But default is being halal. The default is halal. So the Prophet Muhammad, he did not reject a lot of pre-Islamic Arab customs, which were not haram in any sense. They were sort of regular, human customs. So this had an influence on Islam, and then when Islam went into Persia and other countries, that influenced Islam too. So it's difficult to say where Islam stops and then the culture begins, and that's artificial, I think.
And one thing I've noticed.
Go ahead. I was just going to say, one last thing, that even you find today with Muslims and we talked about this, like converts,
Hmm.
like white converts in especially in Anglo-Saxon countries, their culture is influencing Islam too.
In the
Ha-
West,
yeah, have you noticed this? Like white culture is more and more having its an influence on
definitely.
Islam,
I noticed that with
and
Western Muslims.
exactly, yeah. So that's interesting.
At
Yeah.
least in the context of the Middle East, I've noticed that Arab culture has kind of come hand in hand with Islam in the sense that it almost seems like Islam was the best thing that happened as in terms of spreading Arab culture and Arab identity around, because you have the Quran being read in Arabic, whether or not they understand it, it's a different debate. But from Morocco to the Bengal to the
Mm,
Balkans to Comoros, and so much of being Muslim is being adjacent to, if not Arab culture, but maybe early Islam was so defined by Arabs that it feels that way. So
mm,
just learning Arabic, writing even your own native language in Arabic, praying in Arabic, visiting Arab countries, our clothes are influenced by Arabs. It almost becomes blurry. Where is the line? Where does Arabness end and Muslimness, if I can say that, begin? I remember one time I was in Egypt in the rebuilt Library of Alexandria talking to some Egyptian
mhm.
guy. Or he was a kid. He was like 15, 16.
By the way, let me. I'm sorry. Let me cut in
No, go
there.
ahead.
How was it? Was it really as awesome as they say?
It's
'Cause I heard
beautiful.
it.
It's well done.
Yeah.
It was. I was surprised, like
Okay.
pleasantly
Okay.
surprised. It's very
So
well
so
done.
it's a worthy like inhabitant of the original.
It is, in my opinion, it was very nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Okay.
we were sitting there and talking, and he was talking about Egypt, and my dad always likes to talk about politics, and said, we Arabs, and then XYZ. And I said, what do you mean we Arabs?
Mhm.
And then he's like, like us. And I'm like, you consider us Arab? He's like, yeah, to me you're an Arab. And I'm like, what makes me an Arab? He said, you're Muslim,
Mm,
you're wearing a turban and a thobe, and you're muhtaram, and you speak Arabic and stuff, you're Arab. And I'm like, so to me you're an Arab. To you I'm an Arab. And he said, yeah, you count as Arab to me. And I said, but I'm from Persia. He says, yeah, but you're basically Arab. What I mean is you're basically
mm.
us. And that
You're
was
gonna get
really
yourself into trouble, man, when you say
that
that.
was very interesting to me, because I
Yeah.
don't know if someone who's from like the core of Arab identity, I
Mm,
don't know if a Yemeni would tell me that. But I mean, Egypt's also
mm,
like an example of an Arabized group. But to
mm,
him, his conception as an Egyptian of being Arab is being close enough.
mm,
Even though I wasn't technically a member, that I was like, close enough to be counted as one. And in the
mm,
sense that he meant, obviously, he doesn't mean that I spoke it fluently, but he meant that, like, as far as the cultural stuff, the milieus of our countries,
mm,
and I found that very interesting. That it happened a couple more times to me in Jordan, where people say, you basically count as an Arab. You
mm,
ended up more Arab than us after living here for so long. So I also found that very admirable, that Arab culture is willing to accept the other with a reasonable degree of attempt to join,
mm,
which is why you see Arabs of every skin tone, shape, size, color, whatever. Whereas, other cultures like in East Asia and other parts of the world have very rigid understandings of what it means to be part of us. And in
mm,
Europe, we see this really come to a boiling point with the immigration, all that. You see rigid understandings of identity really just fail ultimately, because
mm,
your success as a group depends on your ability to absorb the other. So I don't
mm.
want to get to like a really long tangent, because I do also want to continue talking about you. So
Right. Right.
we talk. Go ahead. Did you want to say
Yeah.
something?
No, no, go ahead. I'm listening.
No, I wanted to move back to you. So go ahead and say what was related to that. So I don't want
Yeah.
to lose the thought.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I agree. Yeah. Like, especially the part where when you're a muhtaram, that's very. You need to actually live in an Arab country to understand, what exactly muhtaram means.
Right.
But generally, yeah. I mean, if you're a good Muslim, you'll be accepted anywhere in Islam, then, as far as I can
Right.
tell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so we
Yeah.
talked a lot about being Arab. What did you know, or how did you conceive of being an Arab when you were a child in America? What did Arab mean to you, or being Bahraini or Muslim? Do you recall?
Yeah. Yeah. Primarily, it was a linguistic thing.
Hmm.
You see, when you grow up as a child, especially in a bilingual situation, and I know that you have something similar in your
Hmm.
upbringing. At first, you don't really pay attention to it. It's like the most natural thing in the world to grow up with two languages. So we grew
Hmm.
up with English on the outside and Arabic on the inside. My mom is an Arabic teacher,
Hmm.
so she was very serious about conserving Arabic, and especially our Bahraini dialect, because
Hmm.
locally it really there's a big difference when you know the local dialect and we don't know the local dialect. There's so much sort of culture and color in the dialects.
Definitely.
They're not all the same.
Hmm.
They're distinct. And you lived in Jordan, you must notice the difference between the dialects here.
For
So
sure.
primarily it was linguistic. We were different in terms of language. We were different in terms of religion. But we didn't really, I mean, as a child, I didn't really have a conception of how big the Arab world was, how different, like how different, similar. Like we had Egyptians there, we had Palestinians, back in the 80s. And you kind of felt as a child that they were similar to you, but it wasn't really articulated in any sort of adult, mature sense. It was only later that I could, conceive of sort of, what it means exactly to be, Arab, to be Muslim. But I think the primary thing was feeling different. We felt different from the mainstream, different than white people. And also, and a lot of times you would be disappointed. You would see another brown person, and it turns out they're from a very different background. Yeah, sometimes they're like Hispanic or Latino.
So you had a sense that the other kids from Middle Eastern Arab backgrounds were more similar to you than you guys all were to the other kids.
Definitely, and the closer they got, they were the more similar they were. So there were a lot of Saudis there, especially Saudis from the Eastern Province, which are quite similar to us in culture.
Your neighbors, yeah.
Exactly, we're neighbors, and those were really close to us. Even their dialects were close.
Wow.
Yeah.
You mentioned something to me before that you and the kids spoke English to each other, even the other Arab kids.
That. Yeah,
we did that. We Persians did that as well.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any thoughts, or would you like to elaborate on that? I find that very interesting.
No, it was completely. See, back then, I like I said, I was too young to sort of think about it. I was too young to reflect on it. It was completely normal, completely natural. We didn't.
Yeah.
It was instinctive, and that's why English is so powerful. It's like
right. It's incredible.
Kids pick it up, and they just use it because everything cool was in English, basically.
Right.
I mean, and I said this before, like in the 80s, we were like pre-internet in those times, and pre-memes and pre-Twitter, and all that. But a lot of these elements were coming into place. So the PC, was becoming widespread. So, obviously without the PC, you can't have the internet. And you had a sort of a cartoon culture. You had, Sega, the Nintendo systems, all these, the gamer culture was beginning to form. And all of that was in English.
Right.
But there was but we didn't have any conception. Like I read, for example, sometimes in linguistics literature that sometimes people, they jettison their old native language, sort of, in a conscious way because they feel that the new language is
I've heard of this
more modern and more but we didn't actually think about that. We spoke Arabic with our parents, but then we went to school even with our sort of brown friends, with our Muslim friends, Arab friends. We spoke English simply because it came to us naturally.
Right.
It was what kids did. We didn't actually make a conscious decision.
Exactly.
I don't want to speak Arabic because it's boring, or because my grandpa talks it. No, it just came to us naturally. Instinctive.
That's incredible. The kids, they know which language is more powerful, which language is dominant, which language is cooler.
Even though they might not actually put it that way.
Right. They might not understand all that, but they know somehow. And it's incredible because I talked to people who are, a lady who was a Persian teacher in Michigan, and one of her issues was convincing kids to want to learn, because it's just so hard to convince a kid to learn something that's not cool, that's not mainstream, that's not new, that won't offer them something interesting. And I think that's a big crisis for us, even in the homelands of, we need to find a way to make the kids interested in learning their native languages. Otherwise, we'll just get more and more anglicized. You already see this in so many parts of the East where like the elites of a country will, I mean, it's not that in the Arab world. Everyone knows Arabic in the Arab world. But in some parts of the post-colonial world, the elites of a country will actually just only know the colonial language. They won't even know the native language. Like I meet Pakistanis who don't know Urdu, and Sri Lankans who don't know Tamil, and I mean, the list goes on of people from these countries.
That blows my mind, to be from a country and not to know your native language.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. There's the post-colonial element, there's the class element, but again, to me, it's also inconceivable. Like Iran, I feel blessed in the sense that there is none of that in Iran, for bad reasons, ultimately, I think. But I guess the good is no one grows up in Iran not knowing Persian. You just have to know it. Like our country is ran on the native language, and I really would fear to see a day where it's not the case. And
the same way in Turkey too. It's impossible to be, a Turk if you don't know Turkish.
Right, and that's, I think maybe that's because to us it's like asas. It's a base of our identity is part of our language. Whereas to other groups maybe it's not. But to Arabs, I think that ultimately is what defines your Arabness, is if you're natively speaking Arabic. If that's the only language you natively speak.
Language, is a very important part of it, and I would say it's the most important part of being an Arab today, like an Arab in the Nazarite sense. In the sense that it was expounded and promoted by Jamal Abdel Nasser. Because you have so many types of Arabs, culturally, that's historically, Arabs, when they emerged from the peninsula, they Arabized other Middle Eastern people. So we're already Semitic, by the way. I mean, it wasn't like they were, Chinese or
Yeah,
native
the
island,
adjacent Semitic groups. Yeah.
Exactly. They were already speaking Aramaic and languages like these. So a big part of being an Arab, and politically, that is what being an Arab means, basically. I mean, it does. You don't have to belong to one of the 360. Oh, I don't remember the number exactly. I
The
don't remember.
22. It's 22.
It's a lot of, No. I was talking about the ancient tribes that existed at the time of the
Oh,
Prophet
okay.
Muhammad. Because you have 360, idols in the Kaaba. So I'm not exactly sure
Yeah,
on the number.
everyone represented a tribe.
Exactly. So you don't have to belong to these tribes. I mean, you could be a Kurd, you could be a Persian. You're in an Arabic-speaking country for one generation, two generations. You're an Arab. I mean, even
Right.
here in the Gulf, we have, a lot of Gulf people who are not strictly speaking from a historical point of view. They're not Arab, but they, sympathize with Jamal Abdel Nasser. They bought into the Pan-Arabism project. So, and I think this applies to Turkey too, because in Turkey, when the republic was established by Ataturk, they had a slogan, and I'm not sure if I remember this correctly, but it goes like this: "Bir din, bir dil, bir devlet," like one
Hmm.
religion,
One country.
which is remarkable for a secular country, but
Yeah.
one religion, one tongue,
Yeah.
dil.
Hmm.
Turkish speakers will
Yeah.
know this, and one bir devlet, one dawlat,
Yeah.
one state. And in Iran, it's the same, but maybe in certain countries, like as far as I understand, in Pakistan, they're not really sure, how to proceed with the language
What the,
issue.
yeah, that's a
Exactly.
big
They have
problem for
Urdu,
them.
but then they have English, and Urdu
Yeah.
is not really native to Pakistan. I mean, I think only
Yeah.
7% of Pakistanis actually speak Urdu as a native language.
It's
They speak
complicated.
Punjabi. Exactly. So I guess it depends on the region.
I think it's one thing. It's really noble, though, this conception that if you move to our country and you, in good faith, want to be us, and you speak our language, and you sufficiently assimilate, then you can just kind of join. It's almost like an American version of doing things that predates America by 1,000 years or
I think
something like
there's
that.
a fundamental difference there. It might be difficult to articulate, but you see, this idea can change. That's the thing. Like Nasserite Arabism, a lot of people thought that was a good idea, but now there seems to be, you know, some people are backtracking on that. So
Oh, yeah, I've
I'm not
noticed that as well.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that exactly is always the case, and it's pretty easy to throw it in somebody's face. Like your grandfather was
Yeah, he came here
so
from
and
so and so
so.
place. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and you can tell from the name and from
The origin, yeah, you can
yeah,
sense
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah.
And not,
But
yeah, again, not to say that it's perfect in the Muslim world, but I just think, I mean, for example, I read Bernard Lewis is one of the Orientalists that disliked Islam, and even he conceded that Muslims were pretty good about dealing with my absorption of minorities.
mm-hmm,
Okay, so to bring it back to you, so
mm-hmm.
you were living in America. You said you didn't have an idea of how big the Arab world is? I mean, you were a kid, but you knew that Arab was like an ethnicity and that there were other types of Arabs, and you guys were all like vaguely related to each other. Was that
Mm-hmm.
conception there?
Yeah, obviously, yeah.
Wow.
A lot of it is also, it wasn't just being Arab, it was also being Muslim,
Mm.
because in Islam we were really keen on tahara and najasa,
Right.
being ritually pure or ritually impure. By the way, the Jews call that, I think, what do they call it? Trefa. Trefa, I think, means, it's the same concept, basically.
Really.
Toher means tahir. So we had this concept, and we all, so the implication was that the other Muslims were tahir. The other Muslims
Mm.
were ritually pure. So yeah, that definitely existed.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
incredible.
Mm.
And ultimately, you spent around a decade in America,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Okay. Do you have any specific memories? Because you've mentioned some of them to me.
Mm.
I remember one time you told me a story about someone, they asked you where you're from, and you tried to point out Bahrain on a map or
Oh
something like
yeah,
that.
yeah. That happened in Philadelphia. We were in Philadelphia then, and we stayed there for almost a year. It wasn't more
Hmm.
than a year. Actually, my favorite place in America was Tucson,
Hmm.
and the area that we actually lived in has been now demolished. It's
Hmm.
we lived in a kind of it wasn't actually a compound. That's putting it, making it sound too posh, but it was a series of bungalows basically called
Housing
cluster
for the
bungalows.
international students.
Yeah, exactly. Especially the ones with families. And apparently, after we left, there was an infestation of some sort, so they demolished the whole place. But there was a lot of pleasant memories there. So
Incredible.
and then we moved to Philly, and I had a teacher there called Miss
Mhm.
Savage, and boy was she savage. I mean, she was savage AF. African American teacher, and she was really, she was dumbfounded about where I was from. And this might sound, really funny to our younger viewers. Like you could just look it up on Google, find out where the country is. But to them, like saying Bahrain, like that was really shocking. Like, where is that? Where is that country? Is it the Bahamas with the weird black and blue flag? No, it's not that. Are you like Indian? Because there was an Indian at school, and everybody knew what Indian was, right? Like not the
Yeah.
reservation type, the sort of Indian, biryani type.
Subcontinent,
So,
yeah.
yeah, exactly. Some kind of saying. I apologize to Indian friends out there, but
Anyway, go ahead.
we love the biryani. So anyway, so what she did was she got me a globe. That's the globe that we had in class, and I was in, I think, fourth grade back then. And she said, "Can you point out where Bahrain is?" Now, the only thing I knew about Bahrain was so small that it's really difficult to point out on a map. I mean, if I knew where Saudi was, I've never been good with maps.
Yeah.
So obviously now I know where Bahrain is, but back then I was just spinning there trying to
So
find where
she thought
Bahrain
you were
was.
just faking it.
No, it's I don't know what she thought. I mean, I don't know what was going on in her mind, but she wasn't a very nice lady. Yeah.
That's
And then,
incredible.
but it's interesting. You asked me about the sort of sense of identity, about being an Arab and Muslim, and we all had that. Even though we didn't exactly understand what it meant to be an Arab Muslim, but we had the sense of identity. So I remember once she was talking about a trip that she had made to Morocco. Now, God knows what she was doing in Morocco back in the 80s, but and bear in mind that was the time before the sort of budget airlines and all these sort of
Yeah.
tourism packages. And then she was talking about how women were oppressed
Uh,
in the East, in Islamdom and in Arab countries, and I had no idea how to discuss that. I was like, how old was I? I was like 8 or 9. I didn't know what to say. I couldn't articulate it, but something inside me said, no, you can't sort of my, like, it was Morocco. I knew nothing about Morocco, but as soon as she said Muslim, and I sort of raised my hand, and again, this is one of the things I love about America. I didn't get any flack for doing that. I raised my hand and I said, no, that is not true. I still remember, my words verbatim, and then we had a sort of slight back and forth. Yeah, so
That's incredible. I love that they
anecdote.
gave you the
Yeah.
self-confidence to challenge that. That's
Mm-hmm.
incredible. So
Mm-hmm.
even though you didn't have a great conception of how related to you Morocco is, but you knew that you were a Muslim and you knew that you didn't like her characterization of it and you stood up.
Exactly. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
have
I
similar
felt it was
memories.
unfair. Yeah.
Yeah. I have similar memories doing that in school. We read this
Mm-hmm.
ridiculous book called The Breadwinner about Afghanistan, and then we read The Kite Runner, and
Mm-hmm.
these
Very
like these
Orientalist.
Orientalist
Yeah. Yeah.
Western
Yeah.
native informant type books. They're just awful. And I remember trying to argue a bit, but I was like in fifth grade. I mean, what was I supposed to really know? I was like,
Mm-hmm.
what does a fifth grader really know? But I knew that it didn't sit right. And my dad I told my dad some of what the teacher said, and he came and complained, and they issued an apology. The teacher was saying like Muslims are oppressive to their women, and she was telling
Mm-hmm.
some like anecdote about how she had a Saudi student whose parents were working, whose dad was an engineer who was like getting a PhD. Because we have a lot of engineers, automotive engineers specifically here in
Mm-hmm.
Michigan for Detroit. And she was saying, her mom's face was covered, just like it's described in the novel. And her dad would only speak to me. The mom wouldn't speak to me. And I used to think it's probably because the dad is the one who knows English the best. Makes sense. I mean, he's the most educated, probably.
Yeah.
I mean, now that I think of that, but at the time I didn't know what to say because my mom knew English. My mom worked.
My mom spoke to teachers all the time.
Really?
Yeah,
And
she
then
learned English as an adult, and she spoke it. She does speak it. She still speaks it well enough
that's
to get
great.
stuff
Yeah.
done. Yeah.
And
So I
they
mean, just to
were,
generalize like that, it's just
yeah, she was just
unfair.
giving a really bad narrative. And she's like, yeah,
Mm,
she left. And whatever. I don't, it was just really bad. And I complained to my dad and he
mm,
wouldn't cause the storm. I remember one time they showed us the movie Children of Heaven,
mm,
which is this Iranian movie. It's actually a good one. And it was hilarious because the teacher was like, yeah, we showed this to you because like it was like a Middle East unit or something. It was a social studies class. It was like the worst thing I'd ever done in my life. She's like, just so you could see what life is like for some people. And I raised my hand and I said, my dad grew up in the neighborhood that movie was recorded in. They're like, what? And I'm like, yeah, I've actually been there personally. Like I recognize some of the places and like I
and that
knew the
was
whole.
true. That was actually,
I understood
yeah.
everything. Like it's filmed in
Mm,
southern Tehran. Like I've been to that. I know where that street is. I know where that mosque is. That's a famous mosque called Masjid al-Paminar. Like I've visited this place personally, and the kids were like so shocked. They were like, "Oh my god, that's
mm,
so bad." And I have a friend who's from Africa, and he tells me stuff like this. He's Ghanaian, and he would say like, when I would say I'm from Ghana on the first day of school, first day of school you get a new class, and the kids would just say, "I'm sorry." Like just the way they interact with us sometimes, it's just like makes me shake my head, man. But that's interesting. You came in a time that was just completely different from us. I feel like we can't even imagine how different a time it was back then. You know, like you say, now we have Hassan Minhaj telling white people to shut off. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just unimaginable. If you tell someone back then, it's just
Yeah.
completely unimaginable. And maybe that's part of why we like aspects of this country, is that it feels very American that in only 30 years' time, people can go from not knowing what Muslims are to Muslims being like a meme, part of mainstream meme culture in
Exactly.
America.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, we have rappers
Mm,
saying Muslim words. Like there was some song by like ASAP Rocky's group where Hamdulillah was in the chorus of the song. And I'll send you the song later. It's incredible. It's like run with my squad, Hamdulillah. And I'm like,
mm.
what? Are you serious? Did a rapper just say Hamdulillah?
And apparently Ice Cube is Muslim. I had no idea.
So many
I,
African American celebrities
yeah.
are Muslim. And you know, Dave Chappelle is also Muslim.
Oh, Dave Chappelle is
Yeah,
Muslim?
a ton of them. And
The GOAT? Are you serious?
he said that he never talks about it because he doesn't want to reflect on Islam poorly because he
Oh,
tells
okay.
inappropriate jokes.
Okay.
Dude, you can look up on the internet. So many African American celebrities are Muslim, and I just would have never known.
Mhm.
It's
And the way they put it, it's like so refreshing, but also funny at the same time. It's like Ice Cube says, I'm tight with Allah, like
I
tight.
know, right?
Yeah, I
It,
mean, it's this vernacular, you know. It's
yeah,
very refreshing. Yeah.
and it's really cool that
Mm,
America has allowed Islam to do these things that I feel like in our own countries they wouldn't. Like I remember I sent you this guy, his YouTube channel. It's called Mufti Q&A. But the
mm,
cover of the YouTube channel, it looks like the cover of a rap album because it's in like
mm,
this
mm,
old English font that like Los Angeles rappers use. And the guy will be giving, you know, he's got like he's a mufti certified by the Islamic University in Medina, you know, like a big institution
mm,
for his school of thought. And the way he like interacts with people in his message, he'll be in the minbar, they'll be asking him questions. And then the way he talks, it's like so African American, but it's so Muslim at the same time. Like he's got a thobe and a khutbah and a qal, and the guy asks him a question, and he says, "Should I say salam alaikum or is it okay to say what's up?" It's like if you go up to your brother, and you say, "Yo, salam alaikum." I'm like, I couldn't imagine a mufti in Saudi Arabia like acting so, you know,
don't culturally appropriate, my friend.
being
You're
so, you know,
engaging in cultural appropriation.
being so normal, you know, but it's amazing.
Mm,
You go to like you go to Detroit here, there's like a mosque in Detroit
mm,
that mostly African American converts go to. And in their Jummah afterwards, they're serving you like soul food, like black people food. And it's like
mm.
incredible to me, some of these things that we
You know
see.
what's really incredible to me? That we didn't see this back when I was in the U.S. It's like in the Husseinias nowadays.
Hmm.
You have these young Iraqi, mullahs, um, and they're using, colloquial English
Right. Right.
to bring across the tragedy of Karbala. It's very,
Yeah.
it blows my mind, man. It's like something new out there,
They have nohas or they have raduds
Mm.
in English now.
In English, yeah,
English
and
raduds.
mm,
And then, you know,
yeah.
another thing you mentioned about the Husseini's, I remember I went to Muharram not this year, unfortunately, I was in Jordan, I couldn't go, but the year before here. And I
Mm,
went to a few different centers and they're serving American food with Arab food too.
mhm,
So you can go to get the plate and they have like fried chicken, pizza, and qima. And it's just
mm.
like Coca-Cola and Iraqi China. It's just like blowing my mind.
They serve hamburgers in Bahrain.
No way,
Yeah,
really?
yeah. When it's Muharram, we have these madifs.
Yeah, yeah.
Basically, madif, like how would you put that in Persian? Like
Like a guest
mehman
house?
gah, mehman khane,
We
exactly.
say takia in Persian.
Takia, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So the madif is basically, it's free food. And I remember, I had a couple of white friends.
Hamburger.
Yeah, and I took them because in Muharram, it's a sort of a big sort of family festival in Bahrain.
Yeah.
It's the whole country is shut down for Muharram. Actually, there's the Tasu'a and Ashura are the official holidays
Wow, okay.
in Bahrain. So I had this white friend, so we went there in the heart of Maname, and the guys were serving, hamburgers, like grilled hamburgers, and he was really surprised. He thought,
That's
it's like a
as an
cookout in
Iranian,
Texas or somewhere.
that's
Yeah.
unimaginable to me.
So,
But that's
mm,
something that would happen here. It's becoming incredible. They're even Americanizing Islam in a way where there is this program called Who is Hussein,
mm,
where they set up in American universities and places and they give out free food and they tell about Imam Hussein's story.
mm,
And I remember I was standing with them for a bit and I knew this one person who was in it and I was just talking to them and she was explaining it to these whites who were coming. And I said, "Oh, why didn't you say that he's like the grandson of the prophet and there was like a dispute and all this stuff?" She's like, "No, we don't want to like box Hussein into Islam." they had packaged Hussein with all the other freedom fighters of the world. They had like a banner with, you know, Gandhi and Martin Luther King and like all this stuff, and then his name was on there. And I realized even the way we understand our own identity is they want him to be understood in the West as another historic freedom fighter.
Which
But I
I'm not
thought,
sure that's like healthy, you know.
yeah,
I
I
have a
agree.
lot
I
of
didn't like
comments
it
on
either. I
that.
said, you know, you
Yeah.
really should explain that this is like a really Islamic thing.
Mhm.
But their narrative, their ethos was that they didn't want to even talk about Islam. I mean, they would say it's like he was a Muslim and that they were Muslim, but they're like, we can't. The narrative, the way I read their book and everything, it was totally just like very mainstream fight for justice narrative.
But you know what the problem is, that you can't really make a religion out of that.
Right? Yeah.
Like, okay, even if he was a freedom fighter, like, what does that mean from a religious point of view? You know, that's
Yeah.
politics. You can
It
agree
is.
with it or not agree with it.
I disagree with like you. I
Like,
disagree with.
do you really want to put Hussein on the same, you know, level, like from their point of view,
Yeah.
from the same level as Che Guevara, for example? You know,
Right. I disagree with that too. And
freedom fighter.
I
Yeah.
try to get that to them, but I mean, they were already signed up for the project. They were
Mhm.
wholeheartedly.
Yeah,
But
I guess they
yeah.
knew what they were
But
doing.
to me, I mean, I disagree with a lot of these things. I like some, and I like the fact that there's fried chicken. I dislike the who is the same thing. But I
Mhm.
just find it amazing, these developments that are happening to our identity in American. It's fascinating to see how it's going to pan out in the future. And I remember in that same Muharram, I was at a guy's house, and they had brought a sheikh over from Iraq to do the English, the Arabic speeches, and he was semi well known. And he spoke fluent Persian too. It was beautiful talking to him. And he was saying, you know, you guys need to think about your future, because in 3 generations, you will not be Iraqi Americans, Lebanese Americans, or Iranian Americans. Your grandkids will just be Shia Americans, if you can keep them that, or Muslim Americans. And I found it amazing that he had this foresight. He could see it coming, maybe in a way that we don't even see it coming. That in the same way that, like, I meet people now who say, oh yeah, like I'm Jewish culturally. Maybe one day I'll meet, you know, a guy, maybe not one day, maybe I'll be dead by then, but my grandkids will, maybe if they're here or in America or in Iran, then maybe they'll be one of them. Well, they'll say, you know, I'm like culturally, you know, Muslim American or something.
Mm.
It's incredible to think about.
The mix is already happening, man. Like,
Yeah.
it used to be that you could easily tell what a person's background was, but nowadays you find people, especially in America. I mean, some of them, like, they look Hispanic, but they have German names. Like,
Right, and they're probably from
you
Brazil or something like
yeah,
that.
exactly. So you're having a lot of, you know,
Mhm.
mixing going on, and I think
Mhm.
it's gonna increase.
It will increase
I
it.
mean,
And
despite what some quarters, you know, I mean, they hate this kind of
yeah,
miscegenation, so to speak, but it's all the way
it's
forward. I mean, people.
it's the way forward. It's not going to
Exactly.
go
People
backwards.
meet, they want to get married, and you know, you want individualism. This is individualism. People are going to
Right.
meet, like, you know,
Nowadays we're struggling with how to understand this, because
mm,
now it's becoming rude to say, what are you, where are you from? These types of
exactly.
questions are considered
Yeah.
rude unless you
Mm.
know someone. But to just start with that, sometimes minorities complain on the internet, you know, this where are you from question. And I feel like we're kind of struggling with how we're going to conceive of what identity even is, if when we're all
I don't
mixed.
see why this has to be, you know, seen as a taboo. Like,
Because they
here,
think that it's
yeah.
otherizing, that they're asking that question to consider you
But
different.
don't you want to own that? Don't you want to own where you come from?
Right. So some people want to own being American only. I've met people of
Ah,
our backgrounds
mm,
who don't want to identify. I mean, they say like my ethnicity or my genes are from this place or my parents,
hmm
but they personally just identify with the American
Maybe that's
part.
the fact in their lives. Maybe that is actually how they live. Maybe
Yeah.
they have no connection to, I don't know. Yeah, maybe that's the thing. But
Yeah.
usually,
Wow.
if you hide something, it's not really that healthy.
I agree. I think people should just be straightforward. And I've never had an issue. If someone asks me where I'm from, I say, this is where they can
Because
see that I'm
America,
not
yeah,
German or something. They can see it on my
yeah,
face.
obviously. Despite,
So,
you know, you might claim that you're alien, but yeah, yeah.
so let's draw it back to you again. So you're 10,
Okay,
and because this is also an interesting part of your transition. I think
mm,
we'll slowly wind down after this. So
sure.
you go back to Bahrain, and you're about 12 or 13.
hmm
What was that like? So you go from all you've ever known, really, I mean, other than
hmm
maybe visiting, but all you've really ever known is America, and now you're in as different a
So
place as you can
let me
imagine.
put this in context. I spent the last year of my, you know, being. I've been told, you know, by a person who went there recently, who went, you know, back there recently, that the neighborhood has changed. But back then, it was a middle class neighborhood,
Hmm.
and it was cold. It was really cold. You know, one of my distinct memories, you know, was the warm pretzels that we ate. You know,
Hmm.
salty warm pretzels that my dad
In
gave me with pocket
Philadelphia.
money. Yeah, yeah, it was really, you know, it was really yummy, and it sort of had the sort of East Coast sort of vibe, you know,
Hmm.
with the old, you know, architecture, you know, the sort of, you know, smokestacks and
Hmm.
what have you, and then all of a sudden we go back to this humid. This is one of my first memories of Bahrain. Sort of walking out of the airport. A whole family was there.
Oh, that's
It was like a
incredible.
whole cavalcade, yeah. And I rode in my uncle's Mercedes. And one of the first things that hit me was the humidity. It's very humid in Bahrain, and the smell of the sea,
Mhm.
and the fish. And this is one of the first things I remember. And then we go back to our ancestral neighborhood, and instead of the sort of East Coast feeling with the sort of trees and all that and the squirrels, you see the alley cats
Squirrels.
and yeah, squirrels everywhere.
You wouldn't find a
The
single squirrel in Bahrain, right?
No, no, no. If they were there, if there were squirrels at some point, they must have been eaten by the cats. So there are a lot of cats in Bahrain, especially tomcats. And then you go into into an ancestral neighborhood, and there were still dirt roads there. There were
Wow.
still dirt roads. Yeah, not in Bahrain generally,
Yeah.
but within these
Historical area,
old,
yeah.
yeah, the historical areas
Like
of
we have in
Almahdi.
Tehran. You go to some back
Mm.
streets, they're dirt.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. And then it was a
Wow.
very, very different, kind of scene. And I remember because my dad didn't accompany us during the first year. He stayed back in America to sort of, finish up some businesses, there's some, stuff that he had to do.
Tying up loose
And
ends.
yeah, exactly. Thank God, Musa, especially, with his studies and stuff like that. So it was all just, me basically and my siblings and my mom. And I just felt my heart sinking, because it was completely different. I mean, my mom had told me stories about how it would be great to live with your cousins, how to
Hmm.
go to the khabbaz, to the traditional baker and get,
Hmm.
the warm bread and all that. And yeah, it turns out these things were actually nice, but not having my dad there and being in such a different environment, it
Hmm.
was completely foreign to anything I had seen or experienced before, in America. Actually, at that point, I felt that America was my home. And if we had
Wow. That's
stayed there, yeah,
incredible. It
yeah,
would have
if
been
we
your
had,
home if you had stayed.
exactly, yeah.
I can't
And
imagine who you'd be if you had stayed, man. That'd be so interesting.
I have no idea. Sometimes I think about this myself, and one of the most, well, the things that come to my mind is that who I would have married. I'd probably be married to a Persian, lady or an Indian lady now. Not a
مقدس خانم.
yeah, Muqaddas Khanum or somebody like that. So yeah, so it's a very different sort of environment. But the thing about kids is that you adapt quickly.
Right.
You adapt, especially if it's it was a normal situation. It was us leaving and then going back home.
Yeah, it was
That's the thing
planned. It
about a lot
wasn't
of
traumatic
Gulf.
or yeah.
No, no, no. And
Yeah, it was a
and our
planned
family
event.
was there exactly. My grandfather had prepared an apartment for us. And then there were a lot of things that I was missing in America. Like I didn't have any grandparents,
Right. So
and now
that's
I had,
good.
yeah, I had a set of grandparents. My other grandparents had already passed away,
Rest in
but then I had
peace.
my mom's. Thank you. And I had my mom's, parents, and we did have, the fresh bread and the chickpeas and all
Right.
that. So a lot
How
of nice
different was
experiences.
the Bahrain you imagined versus the Bahrain that you met basically when you went there?
There was no relationship between the two.
What was your imagination of what Bahrain was like?
Um, I mean, I don't know if I can remember from back then, but the stories that I had from my mom and dad, it was basically like an idealized America in my head. It was like, yeah, it's like Tucson, but sort of more rustic or something like that.
Yeah.
I couldn't conceive of how physically different the
Hmm.
Gulf is because if you're used to a lot of greenery,
Hmm.
like trees and bushes and stuff like that. I don't know if there's even a word for bush in Arabic. Oh, there must be a word for bush, but I don't
Probably
I
someone
can't
in
recall.
Lebanon has the word in their head.
Yeah, probably, yeah, because they have Arabs. But when you come to the Gulf, it's all shades of brown and gray and
Hmm.
you know and white. So it's physically it's very different. I suppose it's in a way similar to like New Mexico,
Right. Yeah. So similar to where you
or
were in a way.
Arizona. Yeah, but we were in Pennsylvania, sort of
Oh, so
like I
you
said,
were, yeah, it was
Philadelphia
more recent.
the last year. And then but the Gulf is actual desert,
Hmm.
so that was quite different. And the smells are different, the
Hmm.
cooking, especially in the evening time, and going to the mosque, actually having a mosque, in your
Right.
neighborhood.
Not like a basement or like a room or
No,
something.
no, an actual mosque that was built like 100 years before,
Yeah.
and in which my grandfather had, pride of place. He had his own sort of zawiya, not a
Amazing.
Sufi zawiya, but his own his own
Amazing.
corner in the mosque
Yeah.
with his own, prayer mat and all that. And I have
Hmm.
a story about that too. Maybe I'll tell you that later. I basically I broke one of his neon lights, and then I hid the money, to compensate him in his prayer mat.
Aw.
Yeah, I don't think my septuagenarian grandfather I even paid attention to the coins, but that's another story. But yeah, it was a really different kind of environment. And one of the things that really stuck with me from being in. By the way, this area is called Muharraq.
Mm-hmm.
It used to be Bahrain's capital before Manama was chosen as the capital, and it has a very diverse character.
Mm-hmm.
It used to be the place where, in fact, the majority of the royal family lived.
Wow.
Yeah, in the past, and that's where basically it was the main city, but then a lot of stuff was moved to Manama. And one of the things that really stuck with me was that you would see your teacher at school. I was in fifth grade back then, and then you would see the same teacher in the mosque in the evening. This
No, the
kind of
sense of
communal,
community.
exactly. And this there was nothing approaching that in the U.S. Like in the U.S., I remember we had a Libyan teacher, and that was the closest thing I had to, having a teacher from my own community. A person
Wow.
who, in fact, came from a country that was, I don't know, maybe like 2,000, 5,000 kilometers away.
Yeah, Libya is
And I
probably
come
closer to Greenland than it is to Bahrain.
exactly, yeah. But then I
Yeah,
come, I come back to my country. Everybody knows me. That was the first question that I got from everyone. Like, whose son are you?
and they know you.
Like, Waldmin. Yeah, like how would you say that in Persian? Like, Pisariki Hasti?
Pesaraki. Yeah, Pesaraki.
Pisariki? Pisariki Bahce, something like that. Because we don't speak Persian, just to put that out there.
Yeah,
I love languages. I taught myself
yeah.
Persian, but we're not
We'll
Persian
get it. We'll have to
speaking.
get into that in the future episodes.
Sure,
Your
yeah,
linguistics.
that's cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm not LARPing, as an Arab. So to go back to the place you actually came from, that
Wow,
was, you felt like this was your niche, this was your place, and this
that's
is your natural place.
incredible.
Yeah, but still, I mean, having been in America gave me a different perspective. Gave me a different language, and this has helped me, a lot along the way.
Alhamdulillah. Wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible. And I think your story is so interesting for a lot of reasons. One is, again, just the timeline. You were there kind of in the proto-Arab community days before there was, way before there was. It started to form like a decade after you, essentially. Around when I was being born, that's when that started to happen. And you also returned, which that we've talked about that. There's also other elements there. It's probably a lot to get into now, but you also returned, which is another thing. Most people end up just staying. So you have this even ratio where you were formed by America, but you've lived basically all your life in the Arab world. So you're kind of an even mix, where usually you find people that just stay and they get Americanized. So I find there's a lot of interesting aspects to your identity as far as the time you spent in America. I feel like you spent just the right amount of time, where if you had spent too much time, then it would be more difficult for you to be Bahraini at heart. But if you had spent less time, then maybe you wouldn't have known English as well, or maybe
Exactly.
it wouldn't have been as memorable.
And in fact, that happened to my youngest sibling. Like, he was born in America, but he never lived there.
Right.
I mean, he came back, he was a toddler, so he wasn't really shaped by America in any way. But being sort of a composite culturally, which, by the way, is becoming increasingly common. It wasn't so common when I was growing up. Has its pros and cons. Like, it can make you an outsider even in your own country.
We feel that a lot, don't we?
Yeah. I used to feel that. I mean, now it's different. As an adult, I can sort of control what I put out there. But when I was younger, it was obvious. I mean, even though I was Bahraini at heart, there was no disputing that. I didn't have to prove my credentials. Especially in terms, because I speak the dialect and all that. But when you think differently, this
Right.
people sense the difference, even if they can't quite put their finger on it.
Mm-hmm.
And even to this day, people sense the difference sometimes.
Maybe
I've always had to deal with that.
Your mind is shaped by where you're from, and they can tell that. They can tell by the way you think.
Precisely, yeah.
Right.
But it's interesting how you can sort of represent, different cultures all at the same time.
Right.
Even before this idea of globalization,
The word for this is called third culture, kid, and there's a really informative Wikipedia article that explains all the different aspects of this. But I think this stuff is fascinating. I think as the world moves on, we'll see, like you said, more and more of this. It'll be more and more common to be a composite. And especially now, not even with mixed race, just with people moving around for jobs and living in other countries and expatriates and things. I mean, you live in the Arab world. I met a handful of people who were born and raised in the Arab world and spoke Arabic fluently, but they were from totally different ethnicities. And I met through this one guy, it was like a German guy who was raised in Egypt by parents who were academics or something. And the dude spoke like fluent Masri Arabic, and he owned an Egyptian store, like restaurant in Germany or something like that. But you're seeing more and more of this, especially I noticed a lot in the Arab world because of the economic stuff. People from one place, but they're raised in another and they go back. It's just incredible to see these things.
Yeah, it's interesting. And especially when you talked about, sort of proto, Arab/Muslim community. We had communities back then. It's just that they weren't a thing. Like, how they say this in American slang,
It's a
You
thing, yeah, or
know,
not a
yeah,
thing,
it's a
yeah.
thing. You know, like it's something that it's acknowledged,
Right,
mostly in the media.
right.
You know, and mostly in the internet, basically. Like, so we had our communities. You know, we had Muslim communities. We slaughtered, you know, as I said, meat for these communities. We had informal mosques.
Yeah,
Basically, we used to rent the one-story homes and, you know, convert them to mosques
yeah.
for years. But it wasn't a thing. It wasn't on the media. You know, it was all sort of under the radar, sort of a
Exactly,
grassroots thing.
right. So if you
And
were
even
to,
this, yeah,
you wouldn't know
even
it existed. There was no Google. You couldn't go in a
no,
phone
no,
book.
exactly.
You would
It
only
had to be
know via knowing someone.
exactly. You had to be vouched for, basically. I don't
Right,
want to, you know, makes it sound like the mafia or something, but but you had to know someone. And
right.
the
You
thing
had to
is
know
that
someone.
even this thing that where you have, you know, these sort of modernistic mullahs and what's the proper word for them, like
Clergy,
clergymen,
cleric, yeah.
clerics, and we had that back then, but they didn't have any IG profiles.
No one knew who they were, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, you had to, they had to be introduced, like physically or on the phone. You know, you had to call another state and tell them Sheikh Flan is coming. You know, we
Yeah.
had like one Sayyid who came once, and he was such a cool Sayyid. You know, we went to a local lake, and then he sort of took off his turban and everything, and he took a dip. You know, and he was one of those. You know, he was a pioneer in this sort of English, you know, Noha kind of
Amazing.
style. And, yeah, and but back then there was no recording, so nobody had any idea. You
Oh,
know that
wow,
this guy
you're right.
was a
There's no
pioneer.
social media.
No, yeah. So
Wow.
sometimes I wonder like about these, you know, these characters that we met. Like, is he still there? Is he still in the US? Did he go back to Iraq? I have no
That's
idea, you know.
incredible. You know, thinking
But
about this stuff nowadays, it's everything is so out there on social media, on the internet, on Google Maps. You could go to any new, and a Muslim could go to any new city and just type in mosque, and like 10 mosques appear on Google Maps. Back then, you had to know where, like you said, where that house was and when it opened. In restaurants, halal food, sheikhs, and like you said, it really wasn't a thing back then. And I think we don't
yeah,
really
yeah.
appreciate this now.
I mean, the heart of Europe. I was in Zurich a couple years back, and I was my wife, and we wanted something halal to eat. So we found a Turkish supermarket. You know, so these guys are
It's
Turks.
incredible.
They're they're Swiss. We're, you know, sort of Muslim Arabs from Bahrain, but we, you know, we have this kind of connection. So I go in and I'm getting some, you know, food like cold meat and stuff like that. So I asked the Turkish guy, I say, you know, like bu halal da, like is this, like in Turkish, is this halal? And he says, Inshallah. You know, what is that supposed to mean? Like, Inshallah? Do you hope it's halal? Is it actually halal? Again, you see, you get the joke, you know, because, but yeah, but I mean, nowadays you go on dabiha.com, you know, and then you
Yeah,
can,
Zabihad.com,
yeah,
exactly.
and you know, for UK Muslims out there, like they know where the halal spots are, like where the halal
This happened to me.
is.
I took a
Yeah.
Lebanese guy to an Iranian restaurant. He always wanted to try Iranian food called Caspian. So
Mm.
anyway, I take this Lebanese guy to this place, and he follows a mazhab where he's really serious about zabiha. So certain mazahib of Islam, they say as long as you say Bismillah over a food and it's Ahl Kitab, it's fine. It's like
That
whatever.
didn't fly with us back. No,
Really? Okay.
my
Yeah. So
family.
so other
Yeah.
madhahib or even just personally religious people will say no. I only want a Muslim slaughter thing because you
Mm.
can't. It's not like medieval times when you go to the Christian quarter and the dude is like a cross hanging he's cutting. Any slaughterhouse in America could have an atheist, Hindu, whatever. Anyone could be
Mm.
there. You can't be sure. It's not like that medieval context, which is the
Mm.
ruling of some more conservative madhabs. So he followed that ruling. So we go to the Persian restaurant and he said, "Is this place halal?" And I said, "Yeah, there's like a hijabi eating right there." And he says, "No, but it's not on Zabiha." And I said, "Yeah, that's because like Asghar that runs this place doesn't know what Zabiha is. He probably doesn't know how to use a computer. Like he's just like some 50-year-old Persian guy, you know." So he asked them, "Is the meat halal?" And then the guy says, "Are," like tell him, yeah. And he says, "It's not on Zabiha." We get Zabiha chia. It's like, what is Zabiha? Like even
Mm.
the word itself in Arabic, he doesn't know what Zabiha is. Zib, we say that, but so then he said, "Ask him, is it halal?" I said, "Halal." I go, "Inshallah, halal." And
Mm.
that's like a joke, you know, like, yeah, it is
Mm.
halal. The guy got a little worried. He said, "So is it or is it not?"
Mm.
I said, "No,
Yeah,
no, no,
yeah.
it's
I know a friend of mine. He went to Mashhad, you know, to make ziyarah in the haram there, and he's also one of these. He almost has waswas. Do you have that word in Persian?
yeah,
Waswas.
vasfas, yeah."
Yeah, to be obsessed about something. And so he went to a restaurant, you know, near the haram, and he says, "Is this halal?" And the guy goes, "Yeah, yeah, you know, that's bad." Like, why do we have this, you know, Islamic, you know, system in place if it's not halal? You're gonna ask us in Mashhad, you know, just eat. Bukhur, bukhur, you know. Yeah.
No, that's incredible, man.
I
That's
know
a
guys in Mecca who have asked, you know,
no
restaurants.
way.
Yeah, yeah, in Mecca, like. because this go, I'm not sure. Like again, I said I'm not a cleric, but how does that sort of fit in with the principle of suq al-Muslimin?
You're just
The
supposed to assume if they're Muslim, you just
exactly,
assume.
yeah. If it's an Islamic, majority Islamic country and everybody is Muslim, you can just eat anywhere.
You just
That's
assume that, and if it's not
yeah,
halal, then the sin is for them, not for you. That's what
exactly,
fiqh says
yeah.
about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think originally, again, I don't want to sort of talk about something I don't quite understand, but originally this was an economic principle.
Really
So the
interesting.
idea was that you should, eat from Muslim qassab,
Oh, right. Yeah. Yeah. That
butchers.
makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That
I
makes
think
sense. Yeah. Every Abrahamic faiths, I mean, Christianity has lost this sensibility, but we and the Jews have this idea of supporting one another.
because nowadays a lot of Muslims have been understanding the idea that it's not really wise to invent imaginary benefits for eating halal. Like a lot of people are talking about, it's spiritually like, or
Oh, right.
I don't know,
Yeah.
there's some sort of molecule
I've
in the
talked
meat.
about this with
Yeah.
Zerar before about how we have these like weird secularized scientific explanations for things that don't need it. Like they say prayer is good for you because the movements are calming, like the
Mm.
yoga movements will
Yeah,
be
yeah.
better
It's
for you.
not Tai Chi, so
Right, exactly.
yeah,
Or they say fasting is good for you because it cleanses your kidney
mm.
or
Go
that's what
on a
the Quran
detox.
says. The
Yeah.
Quran says fast so your Lord may be pleased or something, as the
And yeah, yeah.
Israelites fast.
كما كتب على الذين من قبلكم.
Right,
As it
exactly.
has been
Exactly,
written on
verbatim.
those who preceded you.
Right,
So
yeah. So
yeah,
meaning the
yeah.
Jews. So then he didn't say because of your kidney, and he didn't say pray so you can do what the Hindus do. I mean,
Mm,
those movements, I mean, they just came from whatever the prophet, peace upon him, did. But we do these things a lot, like you say,
mm,
molecules and stuff like that. And
mm,
so Muslim social media produces these ridiculous things, or they find a cucumber
mm.
that looks like it says Allah on it, and it's getting shared to every WhatsApp.
I think these kinds of gimmicks, they're actually counterproductive.
I agree. I think it's actually
Like,
insulting to our
like,
religion.
do you have to see? Like, I remember, when we lived back in Muharraq, in our neighborhood, some local woman claimed that she found a date, which we love dates in Tamar,
Yeah.
in the
Not
Gulf.
the
You
haram
guys,
date, the
no, no,
food
no, of
date,
course not. No, astaghfirullah. No, no.
the food date.
Yeah, no. You don't go on a haram date. You get fixed up by your mother. That's a different story. You guys call it khurma, right? Khurma,
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 yeah, khurma,
khurma.
yeah.
So she found a date, and it said there was some sort of the fibers inside the date. It seemed like it said Allah.
Right.
Like Allah was written. And I was so curious. I mean, even back then, I wanted to see what's going on. And I looked at it. I couldn't, for the life of me, figure out where the writing was. It's like,
Mhm.
what are people seeing here? And then my mother saw it, and I don't think she was convinced either. But she couldn't say that out loud because it's supposed to be a miracle, and we
Right.
say "La'an Allah Shah," like may God damn those who doubt. But
Right.
again, I don't think, like, how is this productive? Like, if you're going
No,
to be
it's
convinced,
not. Yeah.
if you're going to be a believer, then hopefully nothing's gonna. You don't
Right.
need to see, like,
Right.
an anomalous date or the cucumber,
It's funny
or
is the most religious people who buy into these things are actually internally doubtful, and this is on a secular basis because of secularism and science, and so this is to
yeah.
counteract that on the same basis of secularism and science. It's a scientific secular dog. It's not a theological
Hmm.
one. Reminds me of this
It's
meme
it's
I
it's
saw.
not. Yeah, go ahead.
This
No,
meme
no. Okay,
I
good.
saw. It said Muslim scientists then, and it was kind of this like Persian miniature of them in a Dar al Hikmah debating with
Mm,
like an abacus and whatever rudimentary materials they had,
mm,
debating some calculation. It's like Muslim science now, and it was like a picture of Cheetos aligned to look like the word Allah or something like
mm.
that.
Yeah, yeah. Again, I don't think it's very respectful. I mean, and I don't know. I mean, this might sound like controversial, but the people who talk about ijaz, in
Yeah.
Islamic texts, like an Islamic text, uh, prophesied that we would have the internet, or
Right.
DNA or
Yeah.
something.
There's a
I
huge.
mean, yeah,
Go ahead.
yeah. I mean, if you read the sort of old, mufassirs, the tafsirs, the exegesis
Yeah.
of these texts, which we depend on, for our faith. Nowhere does it say that. Nowhere does it say
Right.
that, you'll find the DNA code in the Quran.
Right.
I
Right.
don't see I don't see how this is correct aqidah,
Right.
and
I
and
wrote
even
an
the
essay
Quran, it
about
says,
this.
yeah, Quran says tafakkaru, it says you have to
Thank you.
meditate on God's creation, but it doesn't say that you'll discover, the code for DNA.
Right.
So I don't know. Yeah, again, I'm not a specialist, so I'm
No,
just
I
putting
agree.
that out
So
there.
I don't want to continue this too much, but I wrote about
Sure,
this
sure.
in Jordan at Jordan University. I wrote an essay about the supposed
Mm,
scientific. I find that this is a totally, it's like I said, it's insulting. I think it's a false premise. It's a false starter that you look for things that have been discovered and then you try to explain them via the Quran. It's never the other way around. And I think
Mhm.
ultimately it's just a lost effort. We shouldn't be doing this. We should either just say, yeah, we're Muslims and that's that. There shouldn't be a reason to like prove it via science to believe it. And I saw the
Exactly.
other day like articles saying like scientists say Quran is a scientific document. Or there was one saying Harvard law professor says Quran is the most just book or something like that. And we're always trying to play on their court, and it's almost kind of sad, you know. We
I'll
should
just
just,
add one
yeah,
last anecdote,
yeah,
about that. This is back in the early 2000s, I think. Do you remember that period of the internet was all about forums? It wasn't
yeah,
really any
yeah.
social
That
media
that's
yet.
around when I began using the internet. Is the death of
Exactly. It
that
was
era,
all
like
about,
2004.
especially here in Arab countries, we had all sorts of forums, with, Arabic language forums. So there was this one article which was spreading on Arab forums, and it was like, it was to the effect um, that the DNA code, the human DNA code, was actually encoded in the Quran
Like
in
every
its
letter of the
entirety.
Quran goes to the DNA.
Exactly. Yeah, the response to the DNA code. And, I to me that didn't make sense. So I looked into it. I looked at the internet at that time. And it was, the modem internet. You had to go to an internet
Yeah.
cafe. And it turns out that it was a deliberate hoax. I can look this up and maybe, you can add a link to it later, and when you put this
Mhm.
video up. But it was actually a deliberate hoax by, I forgot who. There's some sort of, I think, atheistic society or something like
Oh
that.
wow, to fool
Yeah, yeah,
Muslims.
or anti-Islamic society. I can't remember who it was. It might have been Robert Spencer. I don't know. So they put out this hoax just to prove that some Muslims were gullible enough to believe it.
Wow.
And unfortunately, they were. And even when they were told, after that, these Muslims were shown, some of them, that there was a hoax. They refused to believe it. So
Right.
again, I don't think it does. It
Yeah, we
doesn't
do a
do us a lot of.
disservice to ourselves.
Exactly, we do a disservice when we accept
It's
stuff like
it's
that.
totally the wrong mindset. Yeah, it's worse to see the most religious folks are always the ones doing this stuff. So
Mm.
wow. All right, we've been speaking for nearly an hour and a half, so I think we should wrap this
Sure,
episode
cool.
up,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
we can
sounds
pick
good.
up this topic
Mm.
because I want to make this manageable for the viewers,
Mm.
inshallah. So this was
Okay.
our first episode of hopefully a lot more of these. I really like this discussion. So today we introduced to you my good friend Wael.
Mm.
Inshallah, we'll be seeing more of him to continue the
But tell them what
conversations.
the name of the
All
podcast
right,
is.
so we're going to be calling this
Yeah.
the Occidentalists because we're the
Occidentalist. Yeah.
counterpart to the Orientalists.
So
You
the
know, we're like
Orientalists.
the
Yeah.
meme counterpart. We have a
Mm.
turban Persian and a qatrad called Khaliji Arab to counter the
Yeah.
whites in their devilry.
We're pouring over Western culture and
Right, right, exactly.
dissecting it. So
Dissecting it
if you see this in 50 years' time, you're gonna know who started this crap.
one meme at a
Yeah.
time. We'll dissect them,
Exactly.
inshallah.
Yeah.
All right, it was really nice talking to you. Especially, I'll have to
Thank
let you
you.
go because I think it's like nearly
Sure.
2 in the morning there.
What time is it here? Yeah, it's 1:14
Right,
a.m.
it's right.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to let you go. It was really nice
Sure. Sure.
talking to
Yeah, that
you.
was really nice talking to you.
For
Very, very
sure.
fun. Okay.
Assalamu alaikum,
Thanks a lot,
man.
man.